If you eat salmon because you believe it's one of the safest foods for your health, this is something you need to hear. Many people later in life choose salmon for the same reason. It feels responsible. It feels like a smart correction after years of eating the wrong things. You order it at restaurants, you cook it at home, you trust it, and you rarely question it. But doctors are seeing a pattern that surprises even them. The people coming in with rising inflammation, digestion that feels heavier than it should, sleep that doesn't restore energy, or cholesterol that won't cooperate, are often the same people who eat salmon regularly and believe they're doing everything right. Nothing feels extreme. There's no sudden pain, no clear warning sign, just small changes that slowly become the new normal. After 60, the body stops giving loud signals. It gives quiet ones, and foods that once worked in your favor can begin to work against you, depending on how they're used. Today, we're breaking down 10 salmon mistakes doctors warn seniors about. If salmon is part of your routine, one of these may explain changes you've been blaming on age. And the first mistake is almost always overlooked. 2. Mistake number 1. Eating salmon too often each week. Many people assume that once a food is labeled healthy, eating it more often can only help. Salmon feels like a safe default. When you're trying to protect your heart and stay sharp, choosing it again and again seems logical. This is exactly where the mistake begins. The issue isn't excess in an obvious way. Meals don't feel reckless, portions don't seem large, yet when the same food appears too frequently, the body can lose its ability to handle it efficiently. Digestion becomes heavier. Energy feels flatter. Inflammation never fully settles, even though nothing feels clearly wrong. Doctors often notice this pattern in people who eat salmon 4 or 5 times a week. One man in his late 60s followed this routine carefully, convinced he was supporting his heart. Over time, meals felt slower to digest, his energy dipped, and his lab numbers stopped improving. There was no red flag, just a quiet plateau. When salmon was eaten less often and other proteins were rotated in, his digestion and energy gradually returned. After 60, the body responds better to variety than repetition. Different proteins place different demands on digestion and metabolism. Using salmon strategically, rather than constantly, helps the body stay responsive instead of overloaded. And once frequency is no longer the issue, doctors usually turn to another mistake most people never question when buying salmon. Mistake number 2. Confusing farmed salmon with wild. At the grocery store, salmon is one of the easiest foods to choose on autopilot. Same color, same name, same promise of being healthy. Most people assume the body won't notice the difference, so they never stop to ask where that fish came from. Once digestion and metabolism slow down, that assumption doesn't always hold. Farmed and wild salmon place very different demands on the body. Farmed salmon is usually higher in fat and denser overall. For some older adults, that extra richness makes meals feel slower to digest, even when portions seem modest. Wild salmon tends to be leaner, which many people find easier to tolerate when it's eaten regularly. The effect is subtle. One woman in her early 70s described feeling unusually sluggish after meals she believed were helping her health. Salmon was a frequent choice, yet she often felt weighed down afterward. Nothing else in her routine had changed. When she began choosing wild salmon more consistently, that heavy feeling eased, and her energy felt steadier through the day. This isn't about labeling one option good and the other bad. It's about recognizing trade-offs. As the body ages, differences in fat content and density matter more than they once did. Foods that seemed interchangeable earlier in life may no longer feel that way. The key lesson here is awareness. Eating well after 60 means paying attention instead of eating on habit. Mistake number 3. Ignoring portion size. Salmon carries a kind of built-in permission. Because it's seen as clean and nutritious, The portion on the plate slowly grows without much thought. One fillet becomes two. A reasonable serving turns into the main focus of the meal. Nothing feels wrong in the moment, because the food choice itself still feels right. The difference shows up in how the body responds to that amount. Larger portions of protein and fat take longer to process. Digestion works harder. Energy gets pulled inward instead of staying available. The signal isn't pain or discomfort. It's that heavy feeling after eating, the quiet dip in energy later on, or the sense that meals linger longer than they used to. This became clear for a man who believed portion size didn't apply to healthy food. Salmon was his go-to choice, and his plate reflected it. He wasn't overeating by appetite standards, but his portions were simply more than his body needed at one time. After meals, he felt drained and unmotivated, especially in the afternoon. When the amount on his plate was reduced, those post-meal slumps eased, even though the food itself didn't change. Portion size matters because more food doesn't automatically deliver more benefit. Extra protein and fat don't turn into extra strength or energy by default. They become work. When digestion is asked to do too much at once, the return on that effort drops. The practical takeaway is straightforward. Salmon is nutrient-dense, which means a smaller serving goes a long way. Supporting the body often comes from restraint, not abundance. From there, attention naturally moves away from the plate and toward what happens during cooking. Mistake number 4. Cooking salmon at too high a temperature. In the kitchen, cooking salmon longer often feels like the safer choice. Firmer texture. No pink inside. Nothing left to question. That instinct is understandable, but it's also where salmon quietly loses much of what makes it easy on the body. When salmon is exposed to very high heat, its structure changes quickly. The proteins tighten. The fats become denser and harder to process. What should be a gentle, nourishing meal turns demanding once digestion begins. The plate may look fine, but the body often feels the difference afterward. This showed up clearly for a woman who loved cooking fish at home. She always cooked her salmon until it was fully firm and dry, believing that was the responsible way to do it. Over time, dinner began to leave her feeling sluggish and uncomfortable, even when portions were small. She assumed fish simply didn't agree with her anymore. When she switched to lower heat and shorter cooking times, those symptoms faded without changing the food itself. High heat changes more than texture. It shifts how the body experiences the meal. Instead of feeling light and supportive, digestion becomes slower and more effortful. More energy goes into breaking the food down, with less coming back in return. This isn't about taking risks or eating undercooked food. It's about understanding that gentler cooking keeps salmon supportive instead of burdensome. Lower heat, careful timing, and attention to texture make a real difference in how the body responds. And once cooking temperature is no longer part of the problem, what often comes next isn't about the fish itself, but everything that gets added to it before serving. Mistake number 5. Pairing salmon with too much unhealthy fat. Salmon rarely arrives on the plate by itself. What surrounds it often matters more than the fish. Butter melting on top. Creamy sauces spooned over the fillet. Cheese, oils, and rich dressings added for flavor. The meal still looks healthy, but its effect quietly shifts. Salmon already contains fat, and that's part of what makes it satisfying. When large amounts of added fat are layered on top, the balance changes. Digestion slows. The body has to work harder to process the meal. Instead of feeling nourished, meals can leave a person feeling weighed down, even when portions aren't excessive. The issue isn't indulgence once in a while, it's when this combination becomes routine. This became clear for a woman who cooked salmon several times a week and always finished it with butter or a creamy sauce. She assumed the fish balanced out whatever was added. Over time, dinners began leaving her sluggish and uncomfortable, especially in the evening. When those add-ons were reduced and simpler pairings were used, the same salmon felt lighter and easier to digest almost immediately. Added fats don't draw attention to themselves because the fish keeps the meal's healthy reputation intact. But stacking richness changes how the body responds. The benefits people expect from salmon don't disappear. They just get overshadowed by extra work for digestion and metabolism. The takeaway is practical. Salmon supports the body best when it isn't carrying everything else on the plate. How it's paired matters as much as how it's cooked. From there, another quiet ingredient often comes into focus, one most people never think to question. Mistake number 6. Eating salmon that's too salty. Salt doesn't raise suspicion when it comes to healthy foods. It's easy to assume that if the main ingredient is good, everything else must be fine too. With salmon, that assumption causes more trouble than most people realize because salt often hides where no one is looking. Smoked salmon, pre-seasoned fillets, and ready-to-cook options can carry far more sodium than expected. The meal may not taste overly salty, but the body still has to deal with it. Over time, that extra sodium adds up. Fluid retention increases. Blood pressure becomes harder to manage. Energy dips for reasons that don't seem connected to food at all. This became obvious for a man who insisted he rarely ate salty foods. His meals were simple, his appetite was normal, yet he felt bloated and unusually tired. When his routine was examined more closely, salmon was the missing link. Most of what he ate was smoked or heavily seasoned. Once he switched to plain salmon and controlled the salt himself, those symptoms eased without any other changes. The challenge with sodium is that it rarely causes immediate discomfort. It works quietly in the background. By the time signs appear, it's easy to blame age, stress, or poor sleep instead of what's on the plate. With salmon, the salt often matters more than the fish itself. From there, attention naturally moves to another way salmon is commonly eaten, one that feels light and modern, but doesn't always sit as well with the body. Mistake number 7. Eating raw or undercooked salmon. Raw or lightly cooked salmon often feels easier on the body. Sushi, sashimi, and lightly seared fish are seen as lighter choices, especially compared to heavier cooked meals. For a long time, that perception can feel accurate, until the body starts responding differently. As digestion becomes less resilient, tolerance shifts. Foods that once passed through without notice may begin leaving a trace behind. Not sharp illness or obvious reactions, but lingering discomfort. A mild stomach upset later in the evening, fatigue the next day, or a quiet sense that the meal didn't fully agree with you. This became clear for a woman who had enjoyed sushi for years without any issues. Gradually, she noticed those meals left her feeling uneasy later at night and unusually drained the following day. Nothing severe enough to feel alarming, just enough to feel off. When she chose fully cooked salmon more consistently, those reactions stopped showing up. Raw fish isn't automatically unsafe, and this isn't about fear. It's about how the body handles risk as it changes. Lower stomach acid, certain medications, and a slower immune response can quietly turn a once comfortable habit into unnecessary strain. And once preparation style is no longer the question, another overlooked factor begins to matter. Not what you eat, but when you eat it. Mistake number 8. Eating salmon late at night. Dinner timing rarely gets much attention. When the food feels healthy, the clock seems irrelevant. Salmon especially gets a pass because it's seen as light and nutritious. The problem is that what looks light on the plate can behave very differently inside the body late in the evening. At night, digestion naturally slows. The body shifts toward rest and repair, not heavy processing. A meal rich in protein and fat, even good fat, asks the system to stay active when it's trying to wind down. Instead of supporting recovery, That effort can interfere with it. Sleep becomes lighter. Blood sugar regulation feels less steady. The next morning starts with less energy than expected. This became clear for someone who ate salmon most evenings, often after a late workout or long day. Dinner felt clean and sensible, yet sleep grew restless, and mornings felt groggy. Nothing else in the routine stood out. When the same meal was moved earlier in the day and evenings were kept lighter, sleep quality improved within weeks, without changing the food itself. Late-night eating doesn't always cause obvious stomach discomfort. It often shows up indirectly. Trouble falling asleep. Waking up tired. A sense that rest doesn't feel fully restorative. Because the food choice seems healthy, timing is rarely questioned. What tends to matter next isn't the meal itself, but an assumption about salmon that sounds smart on the surface and causes trouble underneath. Mistake number 9. Believing salmon can replace medication or supplements. Salmon has earned a powerful reputation. It's associated with heart health, brain support, and reducing inflammation. Over time, that reputation can quietly turn into something more than it should. The idea that eating well is enough on its own. Food stops being support and starts feeling like the solution. Problems begin when nutrition is asked to do work it simply isn't designed to do. Salmon helps the body function better, but it doesn't correct deficiencies on demand, replace targeted supplements, or take the place of therapies prescribed for a reason. When expectations drift, changes happen quietly. Supplements get skipped. Follow-ups are postponed. Progress is assumed rather than checked. This became clear for a man who took pride in how he ate. Salmon was a regular choice. Vegetables were always on the plate. Because his diet felt solid, he slowly became less consistent with supplements he'd been advised to take. Months later, fatigue returned, and familiar symptoms resurfaced. Nothing about his food had changed. What changed was the belief that food alone could carry the full load. When nutrition and medical guidance were brought back into balance, stability followed. Food works best as support, not substitution. It strengthens the foundation, but it doesn't override biology or erase needs that develop over time. Expecting one food, even a very good one, to do everything quietly sets limits it can't meet. Now that expectations around food are clearer, it's time to look at the final mistake. One that happens before the first bite is ever taken. Mistake number 10. Improper storage and thawing. The final mistake with salmon usually happens long before the pan is hot. Storage feels like a small detail, something technical and easy to overlook once the fish is in the freezer. Many people assume that frozen means safe and stop paying attention after that point. That's often where trouble quietly starts. How salmon is thawed changes how it behaves in the body. Leaving it out on the counter, thawing it in warm water, or refreezing it after it has partially thawed all alter its structure. Even when there's no obvious spoilage, the fish becomes harder to digest. The body has to manage more stress than expected, and the response isn't always immediate or dramatic. This showed up for someone who relied on frozen salmon throughout the week. Meals looked healthy, and portions were reasonable, yet digestion felt unpredictable. Some days the same dish felt fine. Other days it led to discomfort or lingering fatigue. Nothing else explained the pattern until storage habits were examined. When salmon was thawed slowly in the refrigerator and never refrozen, those reactions stopped appearing. Food safety isn't only about avoiding illness, it's also about how much work digestion has to do afterward. As tolerance narrows, small handling mistakes matter more than they used to. Salmon that's mishandled doesn't always taste off, but it often feels off later. Handled carefully, salmon can still be one of the most supportive foods on the plate. Stored properly, thawed gently, and treated with a bit of patience, it delivers what people expect from it instead of quietly working against them. Salmon isn't the problem. The difference comes from how it's handled, prepared, and relied on over time. None of these mistakes are dramatic, and most don't cause immediate symptoms. That's why they linger. They feel harmless, even responsible, until the body starts sending signals that are easy to brush off. At this stage of life, progress doesn't come from chasing perfect foods. It comes from paying attention. Small choices carry more weight now, not because the body is fragile, but because it's more honest in how it responds. The details you once ignored begin to matter. If this video helped you look at salmon differently, that awareness alone is a step forward. You don't need to overhaul your diet or follow rigid rules. You just need to notice what actually works for your body now, not what worked years ago. If you know someone who eats salmon often and cares about their health, sharing this might help them avoid a few quiet mistakes without even realizing they're making them. And if you're looking for more clear, practical nutrition guidance like this, you'll find it throughout the rest of this channel. We focus on food the way it fits into real life. No trends, no extremes, just what helps the body feel better, function better, and move forward with fewer surprises.